Welcome to the Steve Barkley Ponders Out Loud podcast. As instructional coaches and school leaders, you have a challenge to guide continuous teacher growth that promotes student success. This podcast looks to support you with strategies from our experienced guests and insights that I've gathered across many years. I'm thrilled you're here. Thanks for listening. Confidentiality in coaching. Sometime back, a conversation arose in a coaching workshop that I was doing regarding a district designing their coaching around the concept of anonymity. That word didn't hit me well, as I imagined that the reason for someone wanting to be anonymous would be because they believed that being coached would be seen as a negative indicator of their abilities or of their professional status. The opposite of what I would see as the goal of a coaching program. So I went back to check on definitions, and here's what I found. In the definition of anonymity, it described it as the quality or trait of being anonymous, which meant not being named or identified, made or done by someone unknown, or not distinct or noticeable, lacking interesting or unusual characteristics. I then went to check the definitions for confidential. I found this: spoken, written, or acted on in a strict privacy or secrecy, secret like a confidential remark. Another one was indicating confidence or intimacy, imparting private matters such as a confidential tone. Another was having another's trust or confidence, being entrusted with secrets or private affairs. A fourth was being classified as confidential, usually meaning that the information was restricted. Another was being classified as confidential, usually meaning that the information was above restricted but below secret. And lastly, limited to a person's authority to use the information. As I read those words, they reinforced for me that anonymous wasn't a word I could see being connected to the coaching program. It doesn't sound very affirming or growth-focused to me. Confidential, if I look at having another person's trust or that the person is authorized to use the information, that made the term sound a little more relational and growth-oriented for me for coaching. But confidentiality is really complicated. Jim Knight described it as a thorny thing. Listen here to a couple of Jim's comments about confidentiality.
So I think having a policy around confidentiality is really important. Now, I'm not going to tell you what it should be. I'll give you my suggestions that I think you have to decide in your own setting. But I will say this: the most important thing about confidentiality is that there is clear understanding across the system about what the policy is. And then the coach and the administrator have to live by that policy. If the coach says coaching is confidential and then violates the confidentiality, essentially ends up being dishonest with teachers, they will know. They will suss it out. They will be able to tell, and they won't trust the coach. And similarly, if administrators ask questions of coaches that put the coach in an awkward position where the coach is like, I don't think I can answer this question in light of what we said about confidentiality, that doesn't work either. You need to have a clear policy and live by it. But if you ask me, what would my policy be? When we've done coaching and major research projects, our policy has always been the coach will tell the administrator, this is who I'm working with, and this is what we're working on. But the coach doesn't add any evaluative information, like how the teacher's doing or what they see or what they're seeing. The idea is, if the principal wants to know how the teacher's going, the principal should go in the classroom and observe for herself and see exactly what's happening in the classroom. So confidentiality is a thorny thing. It's probably going to be a little bit different in different settings. Ideally, it wouldn't be necessary because of the psychological safety of the organization. But most organizations aren't there. And the last thought is, when you work with a teacher weekly and you meet with them every week on top of being in their classroom, you're going to see things that they may not want to share. And so having a policy around confidentiality can make it safer to have the coaching conversation. It can move things forward. It can lead to better things for teachers and for kids.
So the conversation about confidentiality needs to start from a dialogue between principal and coach so that agreed upon decision about confidentiality can then be presented clearly to the teachers. For many teachers, knowing that instructional coaching conversations are confidential makes it easier for them to talk about what really matters. When we can ensure that instructional coaching is confidential, we can increase the chances that teachers will choose to work with a coach. School leaders want to be building an environment of trust where the issue of confidentiality would become increasingly less important as teachers and leaders become members of teams focused on the common goal of student success. At that point, the work and the results of it become increasingly public. My results are, in effect, our results, and thus not requiring such strict confidentiality. I had an earlier opportunity to discuss trust and confidentiality with elementary principal Glenda Venuez and literacy coach Heather Moncrief from Hillsborough County, Florida. Listen as Principal Glenda starts describing Heather's trust building with staff.
She built a strong relationship with the teachers based on trust, which is probably the most important piece of coaching. You've got to have that trust, not only with your administrators, obviously, because they have to know that what you're doing is the right thing, but also building that relationship with teachers, that teachers feel comfortable to work with her. Our main goal is to build strong teams. And Heather has been, especially for the past 2 years, she's been like that main leader to move our school forward as far as helping us build those collaborative teams during our lesson planning.
Glenda, when you raise the trust word, I know that's a biggie. And part of a coach's trust with teachers is a confidentiality regarding some of their work. Yet at the same time, it's critical for the coach and the principal to have a strong communication system between the two of them. Heather, I'm wondering if you'd start with responding to how you handle that tug between confidentiality and a strong member of the school team. And then Glenda, please chime in and add to that.
Yeah, I think that I was able to build that trust with the teachers because I was already here as a resource teacher. So it was easy to kind of get into that role with them. When Glenda and I talked before I became the coach to start the school year, because we had planned over the summer, that was one thing we had talked about was what are we going to do when I'm working with teachers? And basically she was very clear about she didn't need to know who was doing what specifically unless it was something that was detrimental to kids. So she understood that I would be working with teachers and helping teachers, but I did not need to come report to her and tell her every single thing that was happening and going on with individual teachers, unless it was something that it was like, okay, we need to come up with a plan to help so-and-so. And usually I would get the teacher on board with that, to have that open communication to say, are you okay if I talk to Ms. Benuesa about this? And for the most part, I feel like most of our teachers are very much on board with that and understanding that administrators are similar to coaches in a different way because they do observe, but they do that evaluation part, but they help support them as an educator in their classroom.
Heather, am I hearing in that statement that you made that the teacher's sense in that scenario where you would go to Glenda, the teacher's sense is that you were doing that because it was important for the teacher and the kids?
Yeah. And that's usually how I would try to word it. I would say, well, we've tried this. We see that this, especially we had a lot of issues with scheduling. Scheduling is always a nightmare. So if I'm working with a teacher during the literacy block and then we have issues with kids that go to speech, and let's say they're getting pulled out for speech during the shared reading, and it's just we're juggling all of these things, and I'm trying to help support the teacher and the students, and the teacher's really frustrated. And then that's a question that I would say, we've tried to work it out on our own. Are you okay with me going to administration to talk about, to further, come up with a solution for this?
Heather used the word detrimental. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably the best word that she could have used to describe when I want her to come to me. If it's detrimental to student learning, that I know something, that's when not just Heather, but anyone who is also part of our coaching or our resource staff, they know that's when I really need to know. I don't want to know about the everyday conversations or the coaching cycles. There has to be that open communication between the coaches and the teachers in order for them to really move forward and to have that continuous dialogue so that they can grow. And within that growth, there's growing pains, and I don't need to be part of that conversation. I just want to know, is it detrimental to students? So that I can help support that teacher, because then I'll find other ways or other tools.
Gotcha.
And Steve, I would like to add that coaching is very accepted at our school site. In the beginning, it wasn't as much. We've shifted to where I'm not just coaching teachers that have problems. Right when I started coaching we had a teacher leader on campus, and that was my first client, if you will.
Great start.
Yeah, that I was an expert. So then when people start seeing that I'm not just coaching teachers that are having low test scores or behavior problems in their class, or brand new teachers, it's a good mix of everybody. So having that atmosphere of knowing that you're going to be coached, whether it's in planning or it's in the classroom specifically for literacy, or because we have a math coach as well, or math, it's just one of those things that everybody knows is going to happen.
Here are my thoughts around confidentiality and instructional coaching. First, to build trust, confidentiality needs to be defined between coach and administrator, as well as between coach and teacher. That is an initial starting point for a coaching process, and it should not be changed without agreement among each of the members. The newer folks are to a coaching program or to each other, the more clearly a confidentiality line must be communicated. As we build relationships and develop psychological safety across the school, the need for confidentiality would decrease and could actually interfere with organizational growth. When shared commitment to student success is combined with teacher and administrator collective efficacy, a coaching culture would be natural. I identify that as a coach, my confidential practice is guided by the coachee. With the coachee's input, sharing about our discoveries as a coach-teacher partnership can be used to support others. What falls under confidentiality modifies with knowing each other and with relationships, rather than a rule that is applied in every case. Lastly, as trust builds between the coach and the principal, they commit to building each other's relationships with teachers. I describe it as the coach makes the principal look good and the principal makes the coach look good. The right level of confidentiality supports both individual and team growth. I'd like to hear your thoughts on confidentiality in coaching. You can reach me at barclaypd.com. And as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening, folks. I'd love to hear what you're pondering. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn at Steve Barclay, or send me your questions and find my videos and blogs at barclaypd.com.